that, the Manchester United Academy is in very, very good hands. We've got an excellent setup. They've got great staff. It's a fantastic place to, to go in and be a part of. I remember him watching him one morning, playing for Barnsley, against Everton, and he was outstanding. That was one that's always stuck with me. But I do think that, they've got people and processes in place there now whereby in sort of 2 or 3 years' time, I think that you will see a successful United team.
Hello and welcome back to the One United podcast. I'm joined as ever by Henry. Henry, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. You?
I'm good. Yeah, not bad. Excited for this one. And today we're delighted to be joined by an ex-Man United scout. We're joined by Chris Morris. Chris, how you doing?
Yeah, good lad. Yourselves?
Yeah, not bad. Not bad, mate. So yeah, we were just talking before the show. So Chris is formerly of Everton and Stoke, and he's just been. Well, he's just sort of left Manchester United after 3 years as a youth scout. So really exciting guest to have on. So on that note, we'll move forward then. So we just want to sort of establish first, Chris, your sort of background in sort of youth recruitment and how you got into it, and then sort of what process has led to you getting a job at Manchester United.
So it all started about sort of 8 years ago. I was looking to sort of be involved in football and sort of wanted to do something in football. Coaching was never really my thing. Obviously incredibly competitive, any position in football, but I didn't feel that sort of coaching was sort of a way forward for me. So I always sort of liked identifying players and picking out players and seeing what could improve teams and the processes behind that. So I thought scouting would be sort of like a good fit for myself. So in 2012, I wrote to a lot of football clubs in the Northwest and basically asked for any tips, any advice, if they had any sort of voluntary positions or there's anything I could sort of learn from. I heard back from 2 clubs. I heard from Crewe and I heard from Everton, and sort of went in, had a discussion with both, decided to move forward with Everton. And then, once your sort of DBS is cleared and you've got your badge, you're sort of good to go. So it was a case of sort of trying to force my way in and basically asking the question, really, to sort of get your foot in the door.
It's interesting, isn't it? So what you say you were sort of learning on the job. What sort of skills are required to be sort of a good youth scout?
I think hard work and wanting to get out there is number one. And I think, if you've got that passion for football, if you've got that commitment, if you've got that drive to want to go out, Saturday, Sunday morning, in the rain, in the bad weather, driving for miles, if you've got that passion for it, that's the main thing. And from there you can learn, the basics and that. And I think a lot of clubs will sort of look after and sort of assign you to a more senior scout, and you can sort of shadow them for a period of time and really pick out what they do. I think, sort of honesty, integrity are massive, because ultimately you're out there, you're representing the football club that you represent, and you want to sort of put that across. So you don't want to, tarnish any kind of reputation that a club or an academy has built up over a period of time. So I think, it really is the sort of basics of sort of hard work, dedication, sort of honesty, and, sort of learning and sort of absorbing everything that you can. I think, you've got to sort of leave a lot of what at the door in football in terms. So you might come into it and think, watching football for a long time, I've got a good idea of how this, that and the other works. You've got to sort of park your ego and sort of be willing to take on board advice and criticism from people who've been in the game a lot longer. And that's how you learn, and that's how you sort of develop.
It's interesting, isn't it? It goes without saying, doesn't it, in any profession, that hard work gets you a long way. But obviously, you say you were at Everton for, I think, 4 years in total, wasn't it? You then moved on to Stoke, didn't you? So how did that move sort of come about?
So I had a phone call from one of the guys down at Stoke who were putting a new recruitment team together. It was an opportunity that was very interesting at the time and something that I was, looking forward to. I went round there, went down to Clayton Wood. I had a tour at a training ground. They told me what they wanted to do, and they sort of give me the weekend to think about it. But probably after about 24 hours or so, I decided to make the move down there. They were a Premier League club at the time, and I think they were looking to sort of move forward and improve the academy. So that was a bit of a no-brainer, really. It was a bit, again, more greater responsibility, doing sort of older age groups, more academy games, under 18s, some under 23s, under 16s, that kind of thing. So it was a sort of move up in the age groups for myself, generally speaking. So that was when I decided to make the move there.
And then obviously, the sort of the main reason why we're interested, especially, is you move to United. Now that's obviously, I think it's fair to say it's a bit of a step up from Stoke. So sort of how did that move materialise in the end?
So some of the people I work with went to Manchester United from Everton. So as is the case in a lot of things with football, again, Manchester United at the time were doing a massive recruitment and academy overhaul and restructure, and the club was investing a lot of money into sort of completely sort of modernising the academy and looking to sort of bring it back up to speed as to where it was, and obviously with a big influx of money at City, they'd done a lot, and I think United were looking to sort of get back and compete with them at that level. So I had several phone calls, and it just, in the end, I think there's only really so many times you can sort of not say yes to Manchester United when they come calling, really. So again, it was the best academy in the country, fantastic history of bringing through players, huge club, good opportunity. So yeah, in the end, it was a case of how can you turn it down?
Fair enough, fair enough. I think a lot of people would agree with you there. Now, just sort of moving forward. So obviously, I imagine scouting youth players is a bit harder than scouting, adult players, in that they're not the finished product yet, are they at all? So what's the sort of process behind scouting a youth player, especially at clubs like United who are looking for the best of the best?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that it's more difficult than first team, because I certainly think that a lot of aspects of it are in terms of the first team level. Those guys have got a hell of a lot of pressure on them because of the money that's being spent. Obviously, when they're looking at certain players, they know the talent is there. It's whether that's going to be transferred across and whether they're going to settle. And there's all those kinds of questions around a first team transfer. With academy and youth players, it's, have they got the potential and are they going to fulfill that potential? And that is something that, despite other people may say whatever, nobody has a crystal ball, nobody knows for certain, but what you can see are certain attributes and certain sort of outstanding qualities, and you hope that sort of the program and the sort of support network around them will help them fulfill their ambition, fulfill their potential. Now, their potential might be to be a Football League player. Not every player that comes through an academy and one at Manchester United is going to break into the first team. There's only going to be those sort of one or two sort of every few years that really make the grade and are sort of steady sort of first team players. When you're looking at sort of McTominay and Rashford, and United have far more than most in a squad for the quality of player that they have. But it's going to be a case of, okay, if they're not going to be that Premier League player, do they have a chance of being professional? If they do have a chance of being professional, what's the highest level that we can get them to and help them on that journey? Because an academy isn't just about, ultimately the goal is producing first team footballers for a particular club, but not everyone is going to do that. So if they can't, can we then make them professionals? Do they have the potential to sort of be of that level? Do they have a chance, really? And it's really something that's very hard to quantify. But if you're looking at a boy who's sort of anywhere between sort of 7 and 14, and older, do they have an outstanding attribute that's going to help them potentially develop? And then can the academy and coaching program develop the other areas of the game, whether it's outstanding athleticism, outstanding technical ability? Can all of the other things then be brought together to sort of build a player around them? And that's the key, really, is seeing the potential. everybody can spot a good player. Everybody can point out the best player on the pitch. But the best player on the pitch at 9, 10, 11 might not necessarily be the best player at 18, 19, 20 when they're pushing for the first team.
Does the style of player that they're looking for change from sort of academy to academy? Because, every team's play style is different, and it would seem to me like they'd be looking for a slightly different type of player between each team, or is it quite varied in the fact that they want a player that they can build a team with in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the first teams have varying different styles of play between each club, but I would generally say that there are small but subtle differences between each club. I would say that, there's some clubs that would look at maybe more physical aspects and athleticism, and then there'll be other clubs, I think United in particular, where it's very much a sort of football first mentality where, is he a good footballer? Is he technically competent enough to sort of be part of the program? If he is, okay, let's look at the other things around that. Do we think he's got athletic potential? Does he have that sort of warrior spirit? Do they have that drive and determination? And do they have the other things around that? If you've got, a boy's athleticism at sort of 8 can't be compared to their development when they're 18. There's a lot of sort of, fool's gold and sort of early success indicators that might not be the case when they're older. So it is a sort of a leap of faith with some boys, some players, in terms of, we think he's got the football. Can he develop physically and athletically to help him get there, to be of a certain standard to play at the top level? Because there is no getting away from that now, that, to be a Premier League player, and play week in, week out, you do have to have a certain standard of athleticism.
Definitely. Now I'll hand it over to Henry. Henry, what do you want to ask?
I was going to ask about the kind of standards set at United in terms of scouting. What are the standards and what are the pressures that come along with that? So are you expected to bring in X amount of good players that they think they can kind of, push through to the 21s and maybe 19s and 17s or whatever? What are the kind of pressures that come along with that as well?
I think, sort of speaking from my role, sort of part-time staff, what they want to know is they want to know the players. So in terms of recruitment, that is that sort of their role as a sort of scout out and about watching the games. You've got to be able to identify those players. There's no quota on any players that's sort of good enough for Manchester United sort of per year. So it'd be a case of sort of there may be 1 year in particular age groups where there are 3 or 4 really top players that the club will be interested in, and they're actively looking to recruit particular age groups. There may be other years where the quality isn't quite as good, and there may be none or maybe only one player that they feel will be a standard of sort of requisite for the academy. So it is varying, it's flux, but the main thing as a scout is you've got to know your area, know your teams, know your players. So if something does get flagged up and it's being put in front of you, you can say, okay, we know about him. Here's the reports. This is our verdict on him. At this moment in time, he's gone and signed for a Blackburn, Wigan, whoever. We'll keep an eye on him, but we don't feel if he's the requisite standard for United's academy. Obviously, a Category 1 academy like Manchester United, the technical, tactical, and sort of physical qualities of each player is extremely high. So the bar to sort of be signed as a player is incredibly difficult. But there is the quality out there, but obviously they are competing at the top end of the market.
Emery, anything else before we move on?
I was going to ask, is there, obviously you don't have to answer, is there anyone that you can say that you had a hand in kind of bringing through into the academy in terms of players that people would know of? Obviously, it's all United fans watching this. So is there anyone that you could mention?
I think in terms of that, I think a lot of the boys are sort of they're very young, and they're sort of school age, and they are children. So I wouldn't mention any names of such. All I would say is that the Manchester United Academy is in very, very good hands. We've got an excellent setup. They've got great staff. It's a fantastic place to go in and be a part of. All I would say to any fans watching is the academy is in good health and it's in good hands, and the standard of player that they have there throughout all the age groups is excellent.
Fantastic.
It's definitely an exciting point. We'll sort of branch that question further. And obviously, you were at Everton and Stoke, and I think a lot of those players will be knocking on the door of the first team now. So was there any players there that you've sort of helped bring through?
Again, you're looking at it. There was. I remember sort of quite a few years ago. I had a scout come to me and sort of mention Mason Holgate, and he just joined us from Barnsley. He was a scout who'd got John Stones, and he sort of said to me, if you think John Stones is good, you need to go and take a look at this lad called Mason Holgate. And he was playing he was 16, 17 at the time, playing in the under 18s. It got flagged up. I reported it back to my boss, and it went all the way through to the first team. I remember him watching him one morning, playing for Barnsley, against Everton, and he was outstanding. But that was one that's always stuck with me. He came on board as a scout to Everton from Barnsley, and that's what he said to me. He's still in contact with John, with John Stone's family. And that was one that sort of flagged up. But again, a lot of it is seeing a lot of players now who are sort of pushing sort of 15s and 16s. My role was sort of local recruitment, making sure that sort of Everton, were sort of on top of the local scouting network, and were on top of sort of knowing who the local players were. And again, a lot of those boys, they're coming into the academies at sort of 6, 7, 8 years of age. And it was only a few years ago that I left, so a lot of them now are sort of still only sort of 11, 12. But that's the one that probably sticks out in my mind, where sort of a name that was flagged up to me, I pushed it through to my boss and ended up going all the way to the first team.
That's fair enough then.
Is it? Not bad at all to have on your CV. That's a very, very good player.
But sort of sticking with what you said there, then obviously you say you keep an eye on just the local talent pool, really. But does each team sort of differ in where they get their players from? Because I understand at a young age you're mainly looking at sort of school teams and high level sort of Sunday league teams, whereas as you go up, does that change and you start looking at other academies players and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I would say a lot of Manchester United, the number one aim is to secure the best young talent, locally in Manchester, and obviously they're competing with City for that. The next stage is, can they get some players in from other areas? That'll form the basis of the sort of the first academy group under 9, and then as the ages go through, they will look at other clubs. They will be actively scouting all the clubs in the Northwest, especially. And then as they move forward and older, sort of 14, 15, 16, they'll look nationally, and especially at Manchester United, they'll be looking internationally. They'll be going out into Europe. I know it's sort of 15, 16. They will be, and they are, at that level. The budget that they have, they're actively pursuing not just the best in this country, but the best young players in Europe, and looking at that. So I think that's where Manchester United differs. I think a lot of clubs are similar. At the younger level, everybody's looking for the best local talent. Nobody wants the next Marcus Rashford to be going to play for Man City. Vice versa. When I was at Everton, you want the next sort of Wayne Rooney to be coming through. At Everton, you don't want to be losing out to Liverpool. So that's your number one priority, really. Can you get the best on your doorstep? Can you get them in the program? Can you keep them? The next part of that is, can you add to that locally? Is the boys playing for Crewe, Wigan? Maybe late developers that weren't signed at 9 but have come through. Maybe you get a lot of kids that just start playing football at 9 or 10. So you'll get a lot of boys coming in at sort of 5 or 6, and they'll play and they'll be signed. Their football age is sort of 4 or 5 years older than somebody who started playing at 9 or 10, but they've got that raw potential. You get a lot of that, so it's important that you continue to check the local talent pool in the local areas. I know that teams like Fletcher Moss have been hugely important to Manchester United down the years with the players that they've provided. And in terms of, locally, that's your bread and butter. But yeah, absolutely, they'll be looking at other academies, actively going out. There's a huge network of scouts that will work nationally for Manchester United, and then again internationally as well with the full-time staff they've got and the people that they've got dotted about in Europe. They are looking at sort of Atletico Madrid, Benfica, these kind of teams that that produce on consistently European top teams. We've seen a lot of talent come out of Belgium. Instead of getting that talent at sort of 19, 20, when it's going to cost 30 to 50 million pounds or even more if it's a top player, you're looking before that saying, can you get them for £1 million at sort of 15, 16? Can you bring them over? Can you sort of give them a few years of the Manchester United way? or whatever club that is, if they're operating at that top end, and sort of integrate them into the first team that way. If they then become that player and fulfill their potential, then obviously it's a huge money saver for the football club.
What's the sort of preference in terms of clubs? So obviously United, they may look more worldwide, and Everton, they might look close to home. What's the kind of preference? Do they prefer to go for English talent, or is it kind of starting to vary a little bit more than it maybe was like 7 or 8 years ago, say?
I think number one, and I think this is going to be even more difficult with the Brexit that's going to happen, because we don't really know what's going to happen with sort of European movement or international movement of players. I think number one, especially as Everton, it was very much sort of like British base, and the same with Stoke. So if there are Scottish or Irish boys that will come over and they're at the standard, great, they'll add to them. But they certainly wouldn't want to sort of stunt the sort of potential growth of local boys by bringing in international. And now, obviously, at Manchester United, it's a global club. It's a global team. They are looking for the very best in the world. And I think, they would look definitely more internationally to sort of say, but never at the expense of a local sort of Mancunian boy. So if they've got someone they feel has got potential there, coming through, you look at someone like Brandon Williams, for example, I wouldn't see Manchester United going out and signing a sort of French or Spanish sort of left back for somebody of the equivalent who may be sort of 15 or 16 now. If they feel he's got the potential to get to the first team, I don't think they would do that deliberately. But in terms of sort of building a worldwide sort of portfolio of players, Manchester United are definitely up there competing with, the most elite clubs in world football. Whereas obviously, Everton, I think very much the focus is on more sort of local talent, British-based talent, to get them there. And I think really when you get to sort of an under 23 age, that is when they would maybe look to add some younger foreign talent.
Emery, anything else?
Yeah, I was going to say, how does different clubs, so you've been at obviously Everton, Stoke, and United. How does the investment into the academy change throughout the different clubs? Would United prioritise it more than, say, Everton and Stoke would, or is it kind of the other way around?
So it's interesting, really, when I first got into academy football, sort of 8 years ago now, Manchester City were really just sort of starting to put the wheels in motion on their project. They hadn't moved into the Etihad campus yet. There wasn't that huge influx into the academy. They were, very concentrated on the first team. Looking at the, Everton at the time, huge, big investment into the academy, big priority for the football club. Something that they've always sort of kept a handle on. A lot of change at Liverpool as well, and then Manchester United still producing a lot of players. But I think they needed a sort of a modernisation and a sort of a restructure to sort of more bring them in line with what was happening. And I think over time, you're looking at it now, I think that sort of restructure and that modernisation of the academy has been complete at Manchester United. And I think really in the past sort of year or 18 months or so, all of that work that's happened in the past few years is starting to come to fruition in terms of the sort of setup that they've got there now. And I think obviously Manchester City have put big, huge sums of money into their academy. So I think Everton are sort of, they sort of, recognise where they are at this moment in time and sort of think, right, okay, what's going to be our niche? And I think their niche would be sort of British players where they can offer sort of a pathway through to the first team, as opposed to Manchester United, who sort of, big money, big investment. But I think, you guys might know the figures better than me, but look, I always thought that in the past few years, and I know the club is coming with some criticism, but they cannot be faulted for not backing the academy, because I think the investment in that has been substantial, required, substantial, but also money well spent. And I think it will be, a money saver and a great investment in the long term for the football club.
Very interesting, isn't it, Emery? Now, anything else before I ask my question again?
You mentioned there it is kind of a money saver for the club, and James knew I was going to mention this probably at some stage. Do you think that's in terms of investment? Do you think that's going to frustrate United fans a little bit more to hear that they want to push academy players, obviously, instead of bringing in the big money signings? Do you reckon that's more frustrating, or do you see it from a different point of view, as that's a better way to do things?
I think, certainly the Manchester United teams that I grew up watching, they were heavily academy based, and they would complement that with 1 or 2 big money signings per year with the best foreign talent around the world. You think about, adding a Van Nistelrooy to a team, adding he was a young player and cheap at the time, added a Ronaldo, and he developed into that player. They added, Van Persie was, helped them win the league. I think, the investment they made in Rooney, the domestic talent, but, the best around at the time. I think ultimately you see, other clubs splashing out money. If, from the outside looking in, I'm not a United fan, but, the talent is there. Would they rather have, somebody who sort of cost 60 million, at the expense of the game time of Mason Greenwood? That is, at the time, I think, they sold Lukaku. I think Solskjaer and his staff knew that they had a player there in Greenwood who was more than capable of stepping up. They banked that money from Lukaku, and we saw what happened with Sanchez. I don't think anybody could predicted that didn't work out. It looked like a no-brainer at the time, in terms of he's probably one of the most informed, one of the best players in the Premier League. Been incredible for Arsenal. It didn't work out, so I think one of the things for United fans I'd say is would you want another Sanchez at the expense of a Mason Greenwood? And I'd like to say, definitely not. So I think, the talent is there, the pathway is there. I think, you're always going to have some lean years in an academy. It's not a continuous cycle of a top player coming through every year. You might have to wait sort of 3 or 4 years for the next one to come through. If so, then I think they would look to invest. But at this moment in time, I think they don't want to block a player's pathway. Who's to say in 2 or 3 years' time that like a front two of Rashford and Greenwood isn't going to lift the Premier League title? That is not out of the realms of possibility. So if that happens and you have to wait a couple more years for it to happen, I would say that is worth the wait.
Definitely. Now, I just wanted to ask a question, sort of bringing it back to what you were saying earlier about how, but definitely United tend to scout from other academies, especially up the age groups. Now, how does that process sort of work? Because we're seeing more and more, especially this season, that we've had some big names in Hugill and McNeil come in from, I believe, Sunderland, and Man City. Now, how does that work? So I imagine it's quite difficult, isn't it, when you're trying to take an academy's top prospect? What's the sort of process in terms of negotiating with the club and negotiating with the player?
So first of all, I think with sort of the EPP process that's in place, there are set fixed transfer amounts in place between certain category clubs. If you're trying to buy from a Category 1 club, and under 15, you could be looking at sort of 250,000 sort of plus with a lot of add-ons. Under 16, again, 500,000 with a lot of add-ons can add up and be a lot. If you're buying from lower category clubs, obviously the transfer fee sort of, goes on a sliding scale. Further down the category, the less you pay. That's a deal that sort of all clubs signed up for. So, the transfer fees are sort of set per se. In terms of a process like that, so obviously what you'd have is, and this is the same for all clubs really, they're going to have a network of scouts. Manchester United will have, maybe, a couple of people up in the northeast that will look to cover sort of Sunderland, Newcastle, Middlesbrough, Hartlepool, and lower down, as well. You'll be amazed at how much, big clubs cover lower league clubs or non-league clubs that you wouldn't think that they'd ever be there, but they are. So I think, in terms of that, it's probably something they've been tracking for a while. They'd be looking at it and thinking, okay, he probably was flagged up when he was probably 13 or 14 or even before then. And they will continue to monitor. The regional scout who's on the ground will flag him up and put a recommendation in for a further watch. He might watch him sort of 2 or 3 times, and ultimately sort of put a signing report in and sort of recommend that the player is signed. That will then be flagged up to the full-time staff and sort of, and if the assistant head of recruitment or another senior member of recruitment staff who covers that age group will go and watch purposely that game to watch him. Again, he'll watch him a couple of times, probably put a signing report in, and then again, it'll move up the chain if they're saying yes, until sort of, the head of recruitment will be looking at the player. Ultimately, they'll build a dossier of information, dossier of signing reports to sort of say, we think this player is at the required standard. It could be anything from sort of, 8, 9, 10 reports to sort of 15, 20 plus if you're basing it over, a couple of years easily. And then what they'll look to do is they'll make a formal approach. Now that could be sort of through academy manager to academy manager. That could be sort of through head of recruitment to head of recruitment. And ultimately, when they make that formal approach, the sort of the selling club has to make the family sort of aware of that there is interest. That's doing everything by the book and sort of going through the front door. And then it'll be a negotiation between the clubs. And then, I think one of the common misconceptions is that, players at those ages sign contracts. They don't. They sign registration forms, and the registration form is a year, and it's renewed on a yearly basis. So at the end of the season, if that player wants to go, they will put in a request form to the selling club to say, we don't wish to, renew our registration. We wish to leave. At that point, for the amount of years that player has been at the club, will be required a certain level of compensation. When that player is then registered to Manchester United, the compensation will then be paid to the selling club. So it's not so much a negotiation as such, but I think there is a sort of, I think the best way to do things is to sort of, have those open conversations with the selling club, notify the player, gain the correct permissions and sort of move forward from there. But it's not not at first team level where there's like a back and forth and a to and a fro and sort of protracted negotiations. It is very much a clear sort of, declare your interest in the player, speak to the appropriate people, go through the appropriate channels, and ultimately at the end of the year, they will submit their form. The club will give them another form, and once that form is registered, the compensation will then be paid, and it basically a transfer of registration, really. So I think that's probably a misconception that there's sort of multi-year contract signed at academy level. There isn't. Up until sort of you're receiving your sort of scholarship and sort of your first year pro contract. Ultimately it is a registration form for 1 year at a time that is then sort of renewed mutually each year or reviewed each year, depending on obviously the player's progress and their happiness. Because at any time a player could sort of decide to leave and put in the form to sort of have their registration terminated. But then if another club wanted to sign them, they then have to pay the previous club, the compensation.
Yeah, so it's definitely an interesting process. Now, you say about players sometimes wanting to leave and these 1 year rolling contracts. Now, it's a weird thing to talk about, isn't it? But there is a sort of a stigma that of the mental health of the players that get let go from these academies, especially at an older age. Now, it's hard to say it like just off the bat, but is there anything academies could do better to sort of support these players? Because a lot of these players are devoting their life to football from an early age, just to be sort of let go at the age of 16, 17 and not really knowing where to go. So do you think there could be any sort of improvement in the academy systems to help these players in any way?
Yeah, I think if there's one sort of not failing as such, but one area for improvement of the academy system is definitely in the aftercare of released players. I think if you're signing a player at 9, I think you really need to give them till 11 and 12 to sort of develop. I don't really believe in sort of releasing players at sort of 14 or 13, 14, 15. They've got so much growing and development to do. You just never know, and there's all sorts of examples you can point to of players that have been released at under 15 and they come back into the game and develop later on. I think obviously when you get into 16, that is when you're looking at scholarships and potential first year pros, and that ultimately is when decisions have to be made. And I think there is a definite need for improvement in the aftercare of those players and sort of the preparing them for that they might not get a scholarship. I think if the club has those indications and thinks that early on in the season, or if they're looking at sort of Christmas time and they're thinking, okay, in 4 or 5 months' time, we're not going to offer this player a scholarship, then I think the coaches and everybody needs to have an honest conversation with the family and the parents, so that when it does happen and they're not offered anything further, it's not a huge shock, and maybe they have sort of 6 months or more to maybe prepare to go and prepare to have something else lined up. And I think in terms of the aftercare, I think sort of regular visits and regular checks from sort of, a lot of academies now, category 1, they're employing sort of full-time, welfare officers, education officers, whether they can do sort of family visits, go and sort of see them, have a sit down and just make phone calls, whatever they may be, so sort of regularly, sort of, once every couple of months, to sort of have that sort of phased return. I think the sign of a good academy and a good scout as well is helping out the players at your spot get another club if the first club is not interested or if they get released. So if you take a boy in at 11 and he gets released at 16 and you're in still good contact with the family, I think it's important that, you maintain those relationships. It's all about connections. You might know somebody at Blackburn, at Bolton, at Blackpool, Wigan, at another club that could get them in there and ultimately keep them in the game. And I think that's the number one really, is a sort of, so there isn't this huge sort of shock, there isn't this huge sort of drop. It's a case of, okay, we're not going to give you a scholarship, but we've spoken to Blackburn and we've spoken to Wigan and we've let them know this, and both of them want to take you on trial and have a look, and we've got other clubs that are very interested. So I think it's just sort of helping them in that transition period. Well, that takes a sort of multidisciplinary approach. It needs to be the coach, it needs to be recruitment, it needs to be welfare and education, and I don't think not all quite there yet, but I think it's definitely a big push at this moment in time. And I think it's definitely something, with the mental health campaigns and mental health awareness that's happening, that a lot of clubs are a lot more conscious of now. So I do see those improvements happening in the future, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
It's interesting, isn't it? As you say, there's those sort of support plans in place, but they're not reported at all, are they? And in the news, because that's news to me that there's such a developed system in place to support these players. But just wanted to sort of shift the conversation back a little bit, because we spoke earlier about what each club looks for in a player, but at a young age, especially at United, I think people would be interested to hear, were you ever given sort of a specific instruction as to the type of player they were after at that young age, in a way that they were looking for one specific attribute in a player, or a specific trait, or was it still quite general? If you see a good player, you bring him in?
I think United, more than most, have got a really clear and defined philosophy of how they play. And I know obviously there's been change at first team level in recent years, but the academy has never wavered from, and each club will say they've got their way, but I think Manchester United, more than most, have definitely got a clear and ingrained philosophy. Again, there's no set instruction of sort of, this and this. Every club is looking for similar traits. They all want good players and good footballers. I think it's more in the way that United coach and the way their academy setup is, and the way they sort of the culture is. It's a case of sort of, you can have one player and they can go into one academy program and it'll be very structured. They'll play on quite large pitches. They'll play on sort of, 6v6, 7v7, whatever it is. At United, it's sort of encourage them to stay on the ball, encourage skills, encourage that development and love of the ball. Encourage them to try things, be brave. Dribbling is a huge thing. Everybody loves, in Manchester United, to see a winger, to see that skill, to see that flair. And I don't think it's any surprise when you see a sort of a Rashford and a Greenwood and players like this coming through, that you can tell that, they've got that sort of 1v1 skill, they've got that flair, they've got that bravery on the ball. And that comes from a very, very young age. And I think that's what sets United apart really from a lot of other academies, is they've got that ingrained belief and ingrained culture and philosophy that, this is the way that we do things. This is the way that we're going to coach our players, and this is what we're going to teach them. And if if a boy gets the ball and he does a couple of bits of skill and he dribbles past 3 or 4 and he gets tackled, that's not a problem. We get up, go again. The next time he does it, doesn't happen. The third time he tries it, it comes off. It's all about that development and skill. It's not important about winning games at a younger age for Manchester United. What's important is the individual development of each player to get them where they want to be, and results will come later of that, as a purpose of that. It's not about winning football matches as a child, when you're in the academy program. The natural ability of the boys will shine through, and they will win football matches as they move up the age groups. It's not nobody ever sees sort of under 15s winning or under 16s winning. All anybody remembers is the individual players from those teams who went on to have careers at the top level. They broke through into the first team or had careers elsewhere. Nobody talks about what the result was when Manchester United played Man City at under 10. 10 years from now. It's not important. So that's what sets Manchester United apart from a lot of the clubs, I feel.
It's a really, really fascinating insight. Now, I've got one more question before I hand over to Henry in case he's got any. Now, I know we spoke earlier about the sort of rise of foreign players coming into the academy. The search abroad, and we've seen that this year because we've signed 2 fullbacks, one from Atletico Madrid and one from Barcelona. Now, you say at this moment in time, United will always favour homegrown talent, but do you think this globalisation of football will ever threaten this sort of homegrown quota that United pride themselves on? Because I understand it's not a problem at the minute, but does the natural progression of football mean that homegrown status will ever be in doubt?
No, I don't think so, because I think the top ones will always get through. I think your Rashfords and your Greenwoods and your people like that will always come through. You look at Scott McTominay. He's come through as well. I think it's really a case of sort of being ahead of the curve in terms of Manchester United have got that pulling power. Pogba's an excellent example. Signed him for £1 million at sort of 15, 16. Won the Youth Cup with an excellent under 18s team. Ultimately left in search of first team football. I don't think you'll see that happening again. I think the club learned, a lot of lessons from that in terms of the transfer fee they had to pay to sort of bring him back. I think it's more of a case of, it is an economic, reality. If you feel you've got, and some of these boys may not go on to sort of be like first team players week in, week out, but they'll break through, have good careers, and you may get somebody coming along and paying sort of 15-20 million pound for them as well. FFP, I think an academy's responsibility, is ultimately to provide first team footballers, but if not, it's to provide an income for the football club. It's to make sure that they're creating a profit that can allow for reinvestments in other areas and in the academy itself. I think that's so important. I think Chelsea have been very good at that down the years. Man City have been good at that as well. So even though you might not see many players breaking through, they sell a lot of younger players. Liverpool again have been very good at it as well. Buying at 15, 16 and then sort of selling on for sort of 15, 20 million pounds or more. So I think there is a sort of, an economic sort of reality to it as well. I don't think that'll ever come at a cost to blocking the pathway to a top first team player. But I think the reality is, if you're from, Wythenshawe and you're an under 14 right back or centre half or whatever it is, you're at Manchester United, you're not just competing with, other players in the age in your city. You're competing to be, the best right back at your age, one of in Europe, because that's what you're going to be measured against when you're at Manchester United. The standards are incredibly high. You're measured against the best, and as it should be, really, because if you've got those standards, then it's obviously going to drive quality. It's going to drive forward the football club. It's going to drive forward the academy, and ultimately, hopefully, it's going to end up in sort of a successful first team producing results week in, week out.
Sorry, just before I hand over to Henry, then I follow up on that. Then you say it's either to get players for the first team or to make some sort of money from the players. Now, does that mentality vary from team to team, in that some players will raise youngsters in order to sell for a profit, whereas some will raise them with the intention of getting them into the first team as soon as possible?
Yeah, I do think that is the case. Only from the outside looking in, if you bought a 16-year-old for £2 million from a European club, and 3 years later you go and buy a 24-year-old who plays in the same position for £50 million or more, and then you look to sell on that player, I think the case can be made to sort of say, again, it's obviously a quality thing, but if he's got that quality there, and I think you see a lot of players being loaned out, a lot of partner clubs. That's a lot of the way the big clubs are moving forward. Chelsea have been very successful with their loan system in terms of loaning players out to Vitesse and then selling them on to other football clubs. So I do think there is a case of sort of an economic sort of reality to sort of say, okay, we are going to look to, we're going to buy this player. If he makes a first team, makes a standard, great. But if not, if you're going to buy 10 players at £1 million each, chances are not all of them are going to make the first team. But if 3 or 4 are sold for 10, 15 million pound plus, or whatever that may be, or even 5 million pound, you're creating an additional revenue and additional income for the football club there. So I think that is ultimately, the answer to the question is yes. Yeah, I do think that some academies are used as vehicles for sort of FFP, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, because ultimately you're still giving players a chance and they're still going to go on and have really good careers.
Yeah, definitely. Henry, any other questions?
Yeah, I was going to ask about players that maybe you haven't scouted. Is there anyone at United at a higher age level that you think, maybe from outside point of view, think, this guy is the shit, essentially, really good player that could go on and play for the first team? We've seen players like Galbraith talked about. Who do you kind of see as potentially in the next 2 or 3 years breaking through?
I really like Mengi. I think he's a modern player, physical athlete, sort of brought through the United way. I think that's a position that United can improve on in the first team, and I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 18 months he gets his chance. When you get your chance, you've got to take it. That's ultimately what it is. You look at Rashford when he come onto the team. You either get your chance in the first team due to injury, suspension, or the first team we've got a lack of money. That's real. And when you do get in there and do get your chance, you've got to take it. But he is a player that I like a lot. I think sort of a couple of years ago, Mason Greenwood was the obvious one. But I do really like Mengi. I think he's got a chance.
Perfect.
Henry, anything else?
No, that's ideal. Thank you.
Right, I think that just about wraps us up then. So, Chris, a massive thank you for joining us. It's been really brilliant to talk to you and get this sort of insight. So, yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking me on, lads. I just want to say to sort of yourselves and obviously other United fans out there, the club is a top organisation. I know that they've come in for some criticism in recent years, but there is a lot of good people that work there. I think the culture of the club, for a sort of a global, entity that they are, so global corporation, is outstanding. And I think it was a brilliant club to work for. I can't speak highly enough of the people and the processes that are in place. Where if you go into the Cliff, you go into Carrington, Littleton Road, wherever it is, you're steeped in history. And I think there's a really good culture that runs through the academy and the club. And so I know that the first team were coming for some stick recently, but I do think that it's sort of hard to stay on the right path. But I do think that they've got people and processes in place there now, whereby in sort of 2 or 3 years' time, I think that you will see a successful United team.
It's reassuring to hear, especially with everything in the media at the minute, with everything that's going wrong with United. Apparently, that's good to hear that things are going right. But again, thanks for joining us, Henry, as ever. Thank you for joining me. And if you've watched the video and you've enjoyed it, then be sure to give it a like and subscribe. But until next time, we'll see you later.